You are standing on a dock, phone in hand, two listings open side by side. One is heavy, salty, romantic. The other is cheaper, roomier, faster. Both say ocean ready. Both are lying to you a little. And the one that looks safest might be the one that traps $40,000 of your savings inside a hull you can never resell. Here is what I found after years of crawling through these boats. The 6 sailboats first-time buyers reach for most are almost never the ones that actually cross oceans well, and the single spec that decides it is not the one in any listing. It is not the hull thickness. It is not the full keel. I tested that belief against survey records and real refit bills, and it fell apart. I still remember kneeling in the bilge of a 1978 cruiser in a Florida boatyard, running my thumb across a hull blister the size of a silver dollar, and realizing the broker upstairs had priced it as if it were flawless. That day cost the buyer nothing, because he walked. Most people do not walk. They fall in love first and inspect second. So stay with me, because at the end I am going to hand you a single hull number check on one legendary 40-footer that separates the best offshore boat ever built from a money pit wearing the exact same name. It comes down to a run of years, one bankrupt shipyard, and a resin nobody talks about. Whether this is your first cruising boat or your second, this is the comparison the sellers will never run for you. I already ran it. Let me start with the boat that fooled me first, because it fools almost everyone. The Westsail 32 is the boat that launched 1,000 daydreams. Back in 1973, a national magazine ran a feature calling it the boat that could take you anywhere. And suddenly office workers all over America were quitting their jobs to go cruising. It looks the part. Double-ended, heavy, a bowsprit and a full keel, a hull you could drive through a reef. When a first-time buyer pictures an ocean-ready sailboat, they are usually picturing this exact shape without knowing it. Here is the history. The romance skips. The Westsail 32 traces its lines back to a William Atkin design called Eric, which itself came from the Colin Archer rescue boats of Norway, and it was reworked by a naval architect named William Krelock before the Westsail Corporation in Costa Mesa, California, put it into production. They built roughly 830 of them through the 1970s. That is a lot of hulls still floating around at tempting prices, often under $40,000, but I put the claim under the light, and the light was not kind. This boat displaces around 20,000 pounds on a 32-foot deck, and it carries a small rig for that weight. The nickname the offshore crowd gave it decades ago was the wet snail. In light and moderate wind, which is most of what you actually sail in, it crawls. I have watched a Westsail take an extra day and a half on a passage a lighter boat knocked out in a weekend. On a 2-week vacation window, that difference is the difference between arriving and turning back. So what is the verdict on this one? If you are a retired couple with unlimited time who wants a floating fortress and never checks a clock, the Westsail 32 is genuinely, honestly seaworthy, and I will not pretend otherwise. But if you have a job, a schedule, and a partner who gets seasick when the boat wallows, this romance will quietly eat your enthusiasm. The build is strong. The sailing experience is the trap. And that raises the question that decides the next boat entirely. Because if slow is the sin here, then the buyers who want speed and space usually run straight into the opposite mistake. That opposite mistake has a name, and it is the Morgantown Island 41. Walk aboard one of these and you understand the appeal in about 4 seconds. The interior is enormous. A center cockpit, an aft cabin with a real double berth, headroom for a tall man, storage everywhere. For a family that wants to live aboard, it feels like getting a 41-foot boat with the volume of something much bigger, and the asking prices are often shockingly low for the length. Charlie Morgan designed it and built it in St. Petersburg, Florida, and the yard cranked out well over 1,000 of them starting in the early 1970s. That production number is not an accident. This boat was built to be a charter machine for the Caribbean, where the priorities were interior volume, shoal draft, and forgiving handling for guests who had never sailed. The keel draws only around 4 feet on many of them, which is wonderful for gunk holing in the Bahamas. But that same shoal draft is exactly where the listing goes quiet. I have sailed one of these trying to claw off a lee shore in a building breeze, and the boat simply would not point. It made leeway like a crab, sliding sideways almost as fast as it went forward. In protected waters with the wind behind you, It is a comfortable home. Put it on the nose in open ocean and it becomes a genuine safety problem because a boat that cannot sail to windward cannot always get you away from danger. So the honest verdict splits in two. As a live aboard at a dock or a downwind island cruiser, the Morgantown Island 41 delivers more comfort per dollar than almost anything on the market. As a true go-anywhere ocean boat that has to beat back home against weather, it is one of the most oversold hulls a first-time buyer can fall for. The volume seduces you, the windward performance betrays you when it matters most. Now, here is where I need to correct a mistake I made early, because for a while I thought the answer was simple. I thought you just buy the most popular production cruiser and let volume protect you. Therefore, I looked hard at the boat more Americans have owned than almost any other, and that is where the third trap opened up. I am talking about the Catalina 30 and the Catalina 36. Frank Butler founded Catalina Yachts and built these boats by the thousands. The Catalina 31st appeared around 1972, and it became one of the best-selling keel boats in American history. The 36 arrived in the early 1980s. They are everywhere, parts are easy, prices are reasonable, and a whole generation of sailors learned on them. When a first-time buyer asks a marina full of people what to buy, this is the name that comes back most often. And I want to be fair, because these are genuinely good boats at what they were designed to do. They sail well in a bay, they are roomy for the length, they hold their value because so many people want them. If your dream is weekends on a lake, a big sound, or coastal hops in fair weather, a well-kept Catalina 36 is a smart, affordable choice, and I would tell my own brother to buy one for that. But then buyers start reading blogs about crossing to the islands, and they assume the boat that felt so solid in the bay will feel solid in the ocean. That is the false assumption I chased down. These were built to a coastal cruising standard with lighter scantlings, larger windows, and hull-to-deck joints designed for protected water. The rudder is a spade hung on a single post, and I have read too many accounts of that post developing play and the rudder failing offshore in a seaway. The bulkheads and the way they are bonded to the hull were never meant for the sustained pounding of an ocean passage. So the verdict here is the most important one for a first-timer to hear clearly. The Catalina is not a bad boat. It is a bad ocean boat sold to people who do not know the difference. The cost of getting this wrong is not always dramatic. Usually it is quieter. You buy the boat, you spend 2 seasons upgrading it toward offshore standards, and you slowly realize you have poured refit money into a hull that will never quite get there and will never fetch an offshore price when you sell. That word, refit, is where the real money hides, and it is where the next boat turns the whole game upside down, because the boat I am about to describe looks more ocean-ready than any of these and can still ruin you. That boat is the Tayana 37, and I say this as someone who deeply respects the design. The lines came from Robert Perry, one of the most important cruising designers America ever produced, and the boat was built by the Taiyang Yard in Taiwan starting around 1976. They built more than 600 of them. It is a proper offshore cutter, heavy displacement, capable of real ocean miles, and it has genuinely crossed every ocean on the planet in the hands of ordinary sailors. On paper and on the water, this is a serious, seaworthy boat, and the used prices look like a bargain for that much capability. Here is where the investigation gets uncomfortable. The thing that makes a Tayana 37 look so gorgeous in a listing is the teak. Teak decks, teak trim, teak everywhere, glowing in the golden hour photos the seller posted. That teak is a countdown timer. A teak deck screwed down over a fiberglass deck has a service life, and when it reaches the end, every one of those thousands of screw holes becomes a path for water into the deck core. I have inspected these boats where the deck looked beautiful and the core underneath was wet enough to squeeze. Let me put a number on it, because vague warnings are useless. Replacing a teak deck properly, or removing it and reglassing the deck, can run you well into the tens of thousands of dollars once you count the labor. I have seen quotes north of $30,000 for that job alone. Add the endless maintenance of all that exterior bright work, and a boat you bought for $70,000 can quietly demand another $40,000 over a few years just to stay sound. So the verdict on the Tayana 37 is a split decision, and you have to be honest with yourself about which side you land on. The design is ocean-ready in the truest sense. The specific boat in the listing may be a financial trap, depending entirely on the condition of that deck and that brightwork. A Tayana with a properly regless deck and no teak on the cabin top can be one of the best cruising values in the world. A Tayana with original teak and a low price is the low price for a reason. The design is not the problem. The maintenance debt hidden in the pretty photos is the problem. And that maintenance debt is exactly the thing nobody hands you a method for. Everything I have just walked you through, the deck core, the resin years, the difference between a boat that looks capable and a boat that measures out capable, I put into a set of 3 books I wrote myself, because a video gives you the highlights and a book gives you the whole system. One teaches you the 20-minute dockside walkthrough so you can read a hull, a rig, and a listing before you ever fall in love. Another teaches you how to price the real refit and the yard bill before you sign, and how to turn a survey report into leverage instead of heartbreak. The third teaches you to run the design ratios yourself from a spec sheet in about 10 minutes, so you can tell a coastal boat wearing offshore clothing from the real thing without asking anyone's permission. The survey comes after you fall in love. This comes before, and every volume pays for itself the first time it stops you from signing the wrong boat. If that is how you want to shop, scan the QR code right there on your screen, link in the description, pinned comment, and the books are yours. Now, I said I would talk to the owners among you, and I meant it. And that is exactly the moment I want to stop and talk directly to those of you who already own a cruising boat. Because I know some of you are thinking this whole comparison is for the other guy, the first timer, and it is not. If you already own a boat, stay with me, because this next part is for you specifically, and it costs you nothing but 10 minutes and a flashlight. You do not need a broker. You do not need a haul out. You do not need to spend a dime. Everything I have described about wet core and failing deck fittings can be checked from the deck you are standing on right now. Here is what I want you to do this week. Take a small flashlight and go below on a bright day and look up at the underside of the deck everywhere you can reach it, especially around the chain plates, the stanchion bases, the cleats, and any deck-mounted hardware. You are hunting for brown stains, rust-colored streaks, soft spongy liner, or that faint musty smell that means water has been living in the core. Then go up top and press hard with your thumb around every deck fitting and along the side decks, and feel for any spot that flexes or feels softer than the areas around it. On the deck, gently tap with the plastic handle of a screwdriver and listen. A healthy core deck rings with a sharp, hard sound. Wet core answers back with a dull thud, like knocking on a wet cardboard box. While you are down there, put your hand on your chain plates where they pass through the deck and try to move them, and look for cracks or rust weeping from the seal. That single spot, where the rig loads meet the deck, is where I have seen more quiet, expensive failures begin than anywhere else on a cruising boat. If you find a soft deck or a weeping chain plate now, you have found it on your schedule and your budget, not in the middle of an ocean, and not the week before you try to sell. That is the whole difference between an owner who controls the boat and a boat that controls the owner. Now, back to the short list, because there is a boat I have been holding back, and it is the one first-timers most often reject for exactly the wrong reason. That boat is the Cape Dory 36. Carl Alberg drew this one, and the Cape Dory yard in Massachusetts built it starting in the late 1970s. Alberg was famous for a certain kind of boat, long overhangs, a full keel, a narrow beam, a heavy solid hull, and a sweet motion in a seaway. When first-time buyers scroll past a Cape Dory, they usually pass because the interior looks small and dark compared to the Catalina and the Morgan, and the boat looks old-fashioned next to the wide modern hulls. They want volume. The Cape Dory gives them seakeeping instead, and they do not yet know how to value that trade. Here is what the listing will not explain to you. That narrow beam and full keel that make the interior feel tight are the very things that make this boat track straight and ride easy when the ocean turns ugly. The solid fiberglass hull, without a balsa core below the waterline, removes an entire category of the wet core nightmare I just described. I have crawled through Cape Dory bilges that were bone dry and structurally boring in the best possible way, which is exactly what you want in a boat that has to keep you alive. But I am not going to sell you a fairy tale, because this boat has real limits too. The tankage is small, so your range under power and your water capacity for long passages are tighter than on bigger, beamier boats. The interior really is snug, and for a couple planning to live aboard full-time in a marina, that space matters every single day. And like every Alberg design, it is not fast, though it is a good deal quicker and better mannered than the Westsail we started with. So the verdict on the Cape Dory 36 flips the whole first-time buyer instinct on its head. The boat they reject for looking small and old is closer to genuinely ocean-ready, straight off the listing, than the roomy modern boat they get excited about. The mistake here is not buying the wrong boat. The mistake is walking past the right one because you were shopping for a living room instead of a seaboat. If you can live with the snug cabin and the modest tanks, this is one of the safest ways a careful buyer can get to sea without a massive refit. Which brings me, finally, to the boat I promised you at the very beginning, the one where a single number on the hull decides everything, and where the honest comparison has been buried for decades because it was never in anyone's interest to run it for you. The boat is the Valiant 40, and to understand why it matters, you have to understand what it was. Robert Peary drew the Valiant 40 in the early 1970s, and it is widely credited as the boat that invented an entire category, the performance cruiser, a hull that could actually sail well and still cross oceans in safety. It has completed circumnavigations. It has been sailed single-handed around the world nonstop. Ask serious offshore sailors to name the greatest production cruising boats ever built, and the Valiant 40 is on almost every list. When you see one in a listing at a fair price, every instinct tells you that you have found the one, and sometimes you have. But here is the secret that turns this legend into a minefield, and it is the finding I built this whole investigation around. The early Valiant 40s were built by a yard called Uniflight in Bellingham, Washington. Somewhere in the production run, from roughly 1976 through about 1981, the builder used a fire-retardant resin in the hull layup. That resin did something nobody intended. Over years in the water, those hulls developed severe, persistent blistering, not the little cosmetic bubbles you shrug off, but deep, structural, recurring gel coat blistering that became infamous throughout the sailing world. These boats earned a grim nickname among surveyors as the blister boats. Now here is the part the listings will never tell you, and the part that flips the verdict completely. The blistering was tied to that specific resin used in that specific window of years at that specific yard. Boats built before that window, and especially the boats built later after the Valiant name moved to a yard in Texas in the mid-1980s, do not carry the same defect. So you have two boats, same designer, same brilliant hull shape, same name on the transom, same asking price on the same brokerage website. One of them is arguably the finest offshore boat your money can buy. The other has a chronic, expensive, resale-destroying condition baked into the very fiberglass. And no amount of grinding and drying and barrier coating ever fully cures it, because the problem is in the laminate itself. The honest comparison always existed. Surveyors knew it, longtime owners knew it, but the person selling you a 1979 Valiant 40 has every reason in the world to let you assume all Valiants are the legend, because the legend is what sets the price. The data that separated the good years from the bad years was preserved by the surveying community and by decades of owner records, not by the brokers writing the listings. And that is exactly why you have to know to ask. So here is what you do this week, and it is simple enough to act on before you ever pay for a survey. When you find a Valiant 40 you like, do not look at the photos first. Find the hull identification number and the actual build year, and place that boat against the Uniflight era from about 1976 to 1981. If it falls inside that window, you treat that hull as guilty until proven innocent, and you demand a haul out and a moisture survey with the blister history specifically in mind before you offer $1. If it falls outside that window, you may be looking at one of the great bargains in offshore sailing. Same boat on paper, two completely different futures, decided by a number the seller is hoping you never check. That is the whole game, right there. The listing sells you the name. The hull number tells you the truth. If you take one thing from all of this, let it be this. The boat that looks the safest is rarely the one that keeps you safest, and the difference between a dream and a trap is almost never visible in the photographs. It is in the resin, the deck core, the chain plates, and the ears. You do not need to be an expert to protect yourself. You just need to refuse to fall in love before you inspect. That is the kind of buyer this channel is for. Not the one who wants a salesman to tell him what he already hopes is true, but the one who wants the honest verdict even when it costs him the boat he was excited about, because the wrong boat costs so much more. You are the person who would rather walk away than write a check on a lie, and that instinct is worth more than any survey. So tell me something in the comments and be specific, because I read them and I answer. Which two boats are you weighing against each other right now? Are you torn between the room of a Morgan and the seakeeping of a Cape Dory, or are you staring at a Valiant listing, wondering what year it really is? Drop the models you are comparing and tell me where you are watching from, because I want to know how far these dreams travel. If you are stuck between two hulls, name them, and I will tell you what I would check first. And if you want to run these comparisons the way a buyer should, with nobody profiting from your decision but you, subscribe and stand with the buyers who demand the honest version. The next investigation I am working on digs into a single production cruiser that surveyors quietly flagged for one recurring bulkhead failure that most owners never find until the rig is already loading it wrong, and once you know where to look, you will never walk past it again. I ran that comparison too. Stay with me, and I will hand you the verdict before you spend a dime. Before you close this, let me tell you what comes next. I'm Marcus. This video gave you the overview, but inside the cruising compass, I walk you through that hull number check I couldn't fit here. Ask me about your own listing, and I answer you myself, not a machine. You belong with the thousands of buyers already inside. Just point your phone's camera at the code on screen. Cancel anytime with one click. Now, before you spend a single dollar, there's one bigger choice you need to get right. Should you pick a catamaran or a monohull? I'll walk you through the honest truth, plainly. It's starting right here.